All right, everyone, welcome. I'm Amy Waldron. I'm the Executive Business Lead for Healthcare and Life Sciences, and this is our fourth summer camp session. It's hard to believe that we are nearing the end of summer. For those of you who this is your first one, we will be sending out a link to all of the sessions that have taken place this summer. There's been a pretty broad spectrum. We started with the Google I/O innovations that were impacting healthcare, then moved on to closing the gap, having a discussion about blood-based testing and the future of colorectal cancer screening. The last one we had was agentic AI in clinical development, and today we're going to be talking with our folks from eGen on leveraging AI, data, and cloud for transformative growth, really looking at how do we take a lot of this leading edge technology and actually embed it into our organizations and deliver on business value. So look forward to an exciting conversation here. I'm joined by two people today. We've got Rick Hornstrom and Rob Schmidt. Rob is a principal architect at eGen. He has an MS in medical informatics from Northwestern University. He spent about a decade or so in the healthcare space working at payers, providers, and ISVs, and about 6 years at Google working in our healthcare and life sciences practice. Rick has a wide variety of background as well when it comes to technology, with over 30 years of technology background, a lot of time spent in the payer and provider space, and has various leadership roles from EMC, Dell, and Google, and now is the Chief Growth Officer at eGen. So we will be handing it over to them in a few minutes after we talk about the rules of the road and some observations with regards to where technology is today in the industry. So camp rules, this will be recorded. So I know someone asked earlier, but after this session, we will be sending a link out to everyone who registered. If you pin the slides, it will help with regards to you being able to see the best viewing experience of the slides. The Q&A will take place in the chat, so feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We will answer them either during the presentation, if it's appropriate, or at the end. And please make sure that you're muted so that we have the benefit of hearing what Rob and Rick have to say. With that said, let's get this moving. So with regards to what we're seeing right now, I think most of us would agree that this is probably the most rapid acceleration and adoption of technology that healthcare and life sciences has ever experienced. And really, when you look at it, there's just been this slower evolution as we have digitized data, which took well over a decade, to a tremendous amount of time inputting and outputting of information, and really thinking through, the benefit of digital information, but also the barriers of how that information was accessed. And now we really are at this precipice of creating and exchanging intelligence and being able to use generative AI and agentic capabilities to truly unlock the value of all this data that's been created. And from a generative standpoint, think of that as, I would say, the creative component of it, the search and summary, the conversational Q&A, and then this world of agentic, where you really have the ability to leverage technology and some phenomenal grounding and models to work in a clinical setting and to act on information. And so what we're seeing with regards to the activation of this technology is huge acceleration with regards to driving operational efficiency and employee productivity, looking at transforming the care experience. And that's everything from addressing clinician burnout, which we'll talk about that a little bit today, but thinking through the care journeys and precision medicine, really changing and I would say upping the value that the individual patient is getting and being able to cover more patients, which is critical in a world where a lot of people do not have access to healthcare. The acceleration that we're seeing in research has been proving out with regards to taking things that took years and reducing them to months, and really value-added personalized experiences. We're already starting to see AI assistants emerge, and very much so. Like, there will be an AI assistant for everyone eventually, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, and eventually, who knows if they'll be blunted or not. But the reality is that a lot of the time-consuming work that wasn't as value-added is going to be transforming into leveraging technology and being able to give humans time to interact with humans, as well as spend more time really doing what they want to do and making the critical decisions that need to be made. So obviously it's a journey. If you look on this slide, you can kind of see the 5 major trends that we are seeing. They are not in order per se. There are 5 trends. I would have to say sometimes security is definitely number 1, because if you can't have an organization that is secure, nothing takes place. So multimodality, the reality is that technology has the ability right now to do everything that humans can't from a sense standpoint, looking at voice and video, imagery, and being able to process those relatively real time. Assistive search, if you think about that generative AI with regards to search, summary, and content creation, being able to leverage those agents to act, and really combining these capabilities to really create AI-powered experiences. So the challenge that people have sometimes is, how do you take this great technology and how do you embed it into your organization? And so that is where we have a very robust ecosystem of partners. eGen is one of them. For us, it's really key to, partner with someone who actually has the depth of expertise in the industry, making sure that they understand what the workflows look like, understand the security issues, the compliance issues, regulatory issues, making sure they understand that, but also understand the technology. So having a good partner who can not only help you see the vision, but can roll up their sleeves and help you actually achieve those benchmarks and activate that ROI. And the reality is there's a tremendous amount of business outcomes that have to come into play in order to get this technology into companies. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to hand it over to Rob and Rick, who are going to share what they're seeing, how they're seeing the business cases come to fruition, and actually walk us through the use cases and how people should be thinking about this within their organization. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Rob and Rick.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate that. And thank you all for joining the call today. Rob and I are as Amy stated, with an organization called eGen. Our primary focus and area of expertise is in around healthcare and life sciences. And today we're going to really dive into kind of the payer and the provider space and what we're seeing in the market. When we look at, Rob, we want to advance to the next screen. Really what we're looking at is, how do we help organizations like you bring AI to life? And when Rob and I are in front of customers, often what we find is that the reason that AI's efforts and projects don't succeed in an environment, in fact, 88% of them fail to make it to production, at the core of it is because not everyone understands their workflow. And what I want to do is ask Rob to hit on why that's so important. We don't understand the workflow and how it impacts the value of your artificial intelligence efforts, whether that is trying to improve operational efficiency, or we're trying to make that social leap to have an AI assistant in the clinical space and the care continuum, which in our experience, customers and providers are still not there. But at some point in time, we will have that AI assistant that'll help a doctor, identify the next best action. Today, we're not yet there. Socially, I'm not sure we're ready to accept that, having AI ruminate over our clinical decisions. But the core of it, in order to enable and to reduce the chance that your AI efforts fail, you really need to understand why it's difficult and why understanding your workflow is so critical to your success rate.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously we have a very big base of healthcare clients from some of the largest providers in the country and hospital systems down to 200-person revenue cycle management shops, which we'll talk about in a little bit, on into large, life sciences, test labs, clinical trial labs that are administrating these kinds of things. And they all kind of have different approaches and different expectations and different needs in different areas where they can actually use Gen AI. But the one thing that is really common to them all is, rather than using Gen AI or LLMs to use them, or just, add an assistant or pay for enterprise licenses to Gemini or something like that to their teams, they really need to understand what is going on in the organization and the exact problems they're trying to solve with the technology. Oftentimes, just like any other technology that you would think about, you wouldn't just pick a web framework to pick a web framework. Right? We're not just going to do React because everyone's doing React. You really need to understand, what it is, how the users, whether that's the patients, whether that's the clinicians, whether that's the lab techs, whether that's the adjudicators, whoever, are moving through that workflow, right? Before you can really start to say, like, okay, what are the areas that we can really accelerate and really move through and gain efficiency or gain speed on. And that's kind of what we saw, in the first, I would say probably in 2023, 2024 timelines, people were really just like, well, I'll sign up for an enterprise, agent of some kind, and I'll give it to my folks and we'll see what happens, right? We'll kind of experiment in that case. And people have gotten fair to middling returns, right? There's certainly people in an organization who are able to be supremely effective with it, but there's definitely people who it provides very minimal uplift for, right? And that's because you're kind of just giving tools to people without really having a reason for them to do the tools, right? So the boardrooms would see all this kind of stuff and they would start pushing a lot of that information or pushing these things like go solve this problem kind of thing. And so what we found as we've done a number of these projects within healthcare and also outside of healthcare is kind of we formulated kind of an approach to how we think about a lot of this stuff. And I'll kind of outline what our core positions on AI are here. So AI is uniquely positioned to drive business outcomes. I know there is all sorts of information out there about it, and we certainly cite them, like 88% of these things fail. There was an MIT study that came out yesterday that said 95% of organizations are not seeing any value from these AI tools. And I don't think that's wrong, but I don't think that's because of the tools. I don't think that's because of the capabilities of the tools. And I don't think that's because of what we're able to do with them or what they're capable of. I think it's because people aren't taking a really fundamental back to basics approach. What is the expectation of the outcomes of this? What business value is this use case going to actually drive for my organization, and how is that going to work? And so that's really like kind of the essence of this. You have to start there with understanding where you're at, where your people at, what are the problems they actually have. A framework that I really like to use, and you can go out and research this when I'm talking with clients or trying to understand where they're coming from, is the jobs to be done framework. You can find it's a product management framework. Really good information about like how to think about the user and what they're actually trying to do and how they're interacting with these systems. But once we kind of get below that, it's like, great, now we've got an awesome use case. We understand like there's this point right here where we can really do some awesome work. At a CSR we worked with, for example, it was, when they're putting together their clinical trials, they have like one huge document that all their researchers and all their folks spend a lot of time putting together. And then there's like 10 different variations of that document that have to get put out there. So it was like, and they're like, it's great, but now we have to take all these very expensive people, have them focus on generating different little facets and cuts of that document to share with the various different stakeholders out there. So one of the things we worked on then was like, how do we actually take that core document and accurately slice that into the various kind of components that folks will need, that, like whether that's the investigation brochure or things like that kind of line. Whereas that's a massive time savings and a massive cost savings where it requires a lot of expertise. Now, in order to do that, though, there's a lot more work that goes into it than just like spinning up an agent with ADK and deploying it to Agent Engine. It's a non-deterministic system, right? So how do you understand what it does well, what it does not do well, and how do we measure that? Because once we can measure that particular workflow, then we can actually go to work optimizing it. We can go to work making it better. All of these other options start to unfold themselves as things are going around. And we know that all these models are going to fail. It's statistics, right? It's never going to be perfect in all scenarios. It's never going to be 100% accurate, and you need to kind of take that out of your mindset. But you can manage it, and you can help tune things, whether that's the context engineering, whether that's fine tuning a model, or lots of other. I'm sure there's how do we better use thinking models, right, for these kind of things. There's a lot of options that become available when you build and you have KPIs and accurate evaluations to the workflow that we can then measure, right? So a lot of what we're doing when we go and talk to customers and the projects that we spin up are very, very, very much about how can we assign a KPI to this? How can we build evaluations that are able to measure that KPI? And where can we, how do we get started, right? And what's the right way for us to do this? And do you have the data? Do you have the hooks into this? What is the ecosystem that we're working in? And honestly, it looks a lot like what we would consider to be, traditional machine learning and data science work. And those core fundamentals are hypercritical to your success with any kind of generative AI or things there. I know I've seen a lot of comments come in, so should I pause here for?
No, I think we're good. I just want to add before we move to the next slide, just to kind of double down on the ROI and the value, and more so kind of where the industry has gone over the last 2 years. Because when generative AI first came out, what we saw with a lot of customers is just this laundry list of use cases, as people understood what could this technology do and how could we apply it. And so use cases, I think, were a great way for people to test, does this work and how does this work? And then also I think there was this feeling of, wow, our people are going to have to learn how to use this technology. And so there was this, let's bring it in and let's figure out how to use it. And so when you've got these use cases and then you've got people kind of on their own trying to learn how to use this technology, what we're seeing is that they were playing it out and things were working use case by use case. But what I don't think people appreciate is that when you don't look at it from a workflow perspective, you actually, don't see where if one function is using it, you actually create bottlenecks. And so you may have one efficient group over here, but if you haven't thought through how this is working from a workflow, or even thinking about how you redesign the workflow, now that you have this technology, you actually potentially can remove steps, then you actually don't get the maximum amount of value that you could be getting. So I do think it's a relatively new technology when you think about only 2 years, but we've come a long way. And a lot of people have, we've actually made the technology, I would say as an industry, with this partnership with technology and clinicians, we've actually made it so much better and applicable to the healthcare and life sciences industry. But we've also learned, why are we not getting the amount of value that we think we should be getting? And it very much so is now we've got to look at this from a business perspective and think about how do we actually make this flow from a workflow standpoint. And even what we're seeing right now with a lot of companies, both established and I would say more kind of native in starting up on generative AI type technology, is that there's a redesign process going on in parallel. So you have this operational efficiency of how are we picking specific areas and driving that efficiency, but then also how are we looking at how we do things differently, because this is the value we create. This is the data now that we can unlock that we haven't been able to unlock in the future. And with this technology, we can actually remove steps from the workflow. And what we're noticing is that there is no training when you're removing steps from the workflow. It's actually much more intuitive. So we really are at a point where we have more knowledge today on how to create the significant value that I think we hoped 4 years ago. So with that said, Rob, I know you want to share with us.
Yeah. But Rob, as you go to the next slide and go into the methodology, just sharing from our vantage point what we're seeing. Neville, I get the point that we want to get a little bit deeper in the technology and the need of it, and Rob's going to take us there. But at a high level, what we're seeing especially in the provider space, is a reluctance to enable AI at scale because legal is pushing back very hard. So what we're starting to see is legal opening up the door in the provider space to enable AI to improve the operational efficiencies. We're doing some rudimentary use cases in order to get legal comfortable at some large organizations. The idea of creating an AI bot that can help you accelerate the request for time off. Seems silly, seems rudimentary, but if you've got 3 to 4 links that you have to go to request and identify time off versus making it just a one-click engagement with a bot, that's been landing well with customers. They've actually been asking for that type of use case in HR. We're also seeing a significant interest in around a procurement bot, especially in healthcare, where our margins are -2 to +3 on any given year or quarter. Imagine having the ability to have a procurement bot that analyzes every contract in your environment. Like if you're the lowest sourcing agreement for gloves, masks, etc., or looking for unfavorable payment terms. In many cases, what we're seeing is that simplistic use case identifies significant cost savings. And those cost savings are then becoming a self-funding project or self-funding mechanism to accelerate the adoption of artificial intelligence. Proving it out in a simple use case, but one that provides significant savings in a procurement mindset, allows you to create that investment and that financial life cycle and prove out that I can improve my workflow in these specific areas. But I'll have Rob go through kind of our approach and applied sciences AI life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody has kind of been saying, and it's very, it's important. I think one of the things that we like to stress with folks is taking a scientific method style approach to this is probably the best way to go about this for a lot of reasons. One of the most common is that you could end up surprising yourself. There are unexpected discoveries when you get into the weeds of these problems we're trying to go and solve. And I'll give you an example of one here in a second, which is we're working with an inpatient psychiatric provider. And if you're familiar with that space at all, you know that it's a referral-based business, and those referrals are still based on faxes, actual hard copy faxes that are sent from ERs and police departments and whatever, everybody involved in kind of the care chain for that. And a person has to read them, and they have to go through it, and then they have to figure out who they got to call in order to say, like, yes, we can take this patient, or no, we can't take this patient. So we did a project with them to automate and basically kind of categorize the faxes as they were coming in for that workflow, because these faxes all look the same when they're on the fax server or when they roll off the fax machine, and time is the thing that matters for these intake coordinators. So the more we can optimize that, if they can be focused and attended on the right path, there's kind of like, that's really good. That's revenue. That is more heads and more beds for them, which is what they want to do. They want to keep their facilities as full, and they want to get the treatment to the people that need it the most. So as we were going through this, we built this wonderful solution. It did it. It ranked all of these. We had unexpectedly discovered that we could predict with 89% accuracy whether a fax was going to lead to an admission, which was like a total sidebar thing that we never thought about, that we were actually able to do. But we actually discovered that the most important way to impact that and to increase their scenario and increase their amount of admissions was actually just to find the callback number in the fax and present that to the intake coordinators as fast as possible, so they could just pick up the phone and dial. Like, didn't matter that we were doing all this fancy categorization, didn't matter that we were using LLMs to do it and taking these faxes off the wire, didn't matter about that 89%. What actually drove the business metric was getting that fax number, that callback number for that referral to the intake coordinator as fast as possible. So that's why I say, like, you can have your initial hypothesis and you can have a lot of thoughts about how you can impact KPI, but when you get into reality, that might not necessarily be. And that's where this kind of methodology that I put out in front of us comes in. Let's identify that is our high ROI problem. How can we increase the amount of the admissions time and shorten it so that we're getting high quality admissions faster? We built the evals. We knew what a good admission was versus a bad admission. We knew what the KPIs were. They had very good metrics on how long it took for an admission to go through at a facility by facility level. And then we just started running hypotheses. We started running tests. We started once we had the evaluation data, started running through it. What do we need to do? What kind of context or prompt engineering do we need to do to get this more accurate? We wound up eventually using that evaluation data set to fine tune Gemini to be able to deliver that level of accuracy. And we got it. The most important part of this to get the learnings is we got it into prod in 8 weeks. So it was in front of intake coordinators very, very quick. And that's where we learned how this was going to be. And then it immediately pivoted from, we need to do this super complex kind of thing to, okay, now how do we adjust our process to do the thing that is going to be maximally effective? And we wound up still using Gemini for it, and using it to, just because these faxes come in and they're 20-page PDFs or they're 5-page PDFs or they're prescription renewal kind of thing. So like, we still had to do some work and we still needed Gemini to do it, but the entire tact of what we were trying to do changed in the tenure of that course. And then it became, we moved on and we pivoted to that, and that system is still being in use today. In fact, they're just talking to us about updating it because they're finally, they need to move to the new and the latest and greatest models, and they want to test it out again. So they kind of give you an idea of how this method matters. Let me talk a little bit about.
And Rob, before you dive into that, right? Some folks are also asking for other examples.
Yeah.
So where we're starting to see some interest and some real value to the organizations that we serve is in claims adjudication, right? When a claim is denied, we're always looking at it from a reactive standpoint. Why was it denied? Then we send it to the team. They answer a few questions. They send it back. It might get denied again. There's a lot of latency and flaw in that model, right? Leveraging AI in that space will allow us to predict the denial in advance so that we can identify what additional information do we need to provide the payer in order to ensure that we have a higher degree of acceptance or approval at the time. Instead of having a back and forth, if we can cut out 2 rounds of back and forth, think about the time savings and the financial savings for both sides of the organization.
So, Rick, that's a great, I want to ask the question that just came in for the panel. If leadership 8 years ago did not prioritize standardization of workflows, referral management, scheduling, contact center, et cetera, will AI change their mindset? And what I'm seeing right now is whether or not a workflow is formalized or standardized or not, there is an opportunity today that is making a lot of organizations rethink existing workflows. So even if you haven't standardized it, the thought process today is, you have your existing workflows. So people are looking at those workflows, trying to figure out how do we optimize them. But you also have a lot of companies looking at what action has to be done and what information actually is needed in order to act on that. And they are rethinking how they do things entirely because of the information that they can access today. And what we are able to do when you think about the first and third party data sets that you have access to today, as well as all the different formats, we have the ability right now to untap the value of all of that of all that information that we didn't have in the past because of this technology. So it really does open up a whole new area of opportunity to use this technology and to go into multiple sources at the same time to pull information together to actually make a decision. So I would say that sometimes the concrete workflows may actually slow things down a little bit because they're trying to stay in the way things have been done in the past. And optimizing this technology is not just inserting it into the way things are done. It's thinking about what actually can go away because we have this technology to free up time. And so I would have to say there's an advantage, in some cases to both, but AI can absolutely give you a competitive advantage if you don't have these formal workflows and you can rethink with today's technology, what can we do and how can we do it better?
Rick, do you want to respond?
No, I'm in violent agreement.
Okay, let's move forward and give people some more examples here.
Yeah, I want to talk, and I completely agree. I think I've been in the room when the EMR vendor said, well, if you did it our standard way, and if I could bottle the look the chief nursing officer gave that poor person and sell it, I would, because it was priceless.
Sometimes having nothing actually gives you a competitive advantage.
It's true.
Yeah.
True. So let me talk a little bit, just to kind of dive into an actual concrete use case where we were working with a client to solve a problem with generative AI and how we approach it. So we work with a revenue cycle management team, right? So claims adjudication. And what's important to note is their posts, like all the treatment stuff, they're outside of this. The claims have been submitted. They're going in to try and resolve the issues. And these are often for small provider practices, right? Where it's a very scattered and fragmented, even like medical records indexes and fragmented practice management systems. It's all over the place. So they're kind of sit in that for. But I put this up just illustratively so that we can kind of talk about all the links in the process, right? And this isn't every link in the process. I could break out the 45-page thing that everybody looks at, but most importantly, they're focused on level 4. But I want to illustrate that there's a lot of the stuff that happens before they even get involved or before you even get to the claim, right? And how do we do this? So the client was talking to us. They're like, all our processes are extremely manual right now. We believe we have opportunities to improve our efficiency, and in particular, what we care about is the turnaround time. How long does it take us to take a claim that's been denied and actually get it paid, right? That is the core metric. And any reduction in there, if we can get a 15% reduction in that, you're talking millions of dollars in revenue for our clients and savings for us, because we don't have to spend time further chasing their claims, because it's a very intensive process. They have to go out, they have to go into the charts, they have to go figure out what's going on. So what we wound up building for them was kind of a hybrid approach. So we built a very traditional prediction model using XGBoost and Vertex AI to host it. And what we really want to do was take the raw claim data that we were getting from their practice management systems and predict what are the CART codes going to be for this, right? For this particular things. Let's build a multi-dimensional model and let's kind of figure out. We got to 89% accuracy in being able to predict what the CART codes were going to be. There's, as a general rule for them, they found that there's about 15 that they get all the time. And then there, of all the CART codes, the 40 or so that exist, but 15 are the ones that matter, right? Many of them, they don't matter or aren't going to enter this process because it's an approval or motion phase or something like that. We did that up. So we retrained it weekly because it's a revolving thing. And the other kind of interesting aspect of this was that the providers themselves don't share their insurance agreements, right? They don't share the agreements that they sign. So we're kind of operating really as a black box in this case, where we don't know what the actual provided rates are. We don't know what the actual codes that they should be reimbursing on are. We don't have any of that information. So we have to kind of like intuit it. So that was part of why we retrained weekly, so that we could account for and accommodate the changes that happened at the contractual level, at the level. So that's cool. Like great, really like awesome. We can predict when there's a now. That's really helpful for our adjudicators who are involved in the process, so that they could say like, all right, if I make this change, what's going to happen, right? They could kind of war game it out before they actually went through the process of signing it. The other thing that we did, Arjen, I see your comment. We didn't even get down to it at the disease level where the code doesn't exist. We were mostly focused on the CPTs for this stuff because it's mostly procedural codes that this group did. So it's a massive problem, and I can talk about how data set imbalance has impacts, and that's true whether you're talking about traditional ML models or you're talking about LLM evaluations. Data imbalance and real world reflexivity matter, and I could talk about another industry where we kind of have that kind of stuff. But great point and totally valid. The next step was kind of how do we help these people, these adjudicators, do things faster, because they're all different levels of skills and talents. And they kind of had this goal of what can we do to pull up the bottom 20%. So that's where we took the results for a particular claim or a particular set of claims, right? And then we used Gemini in kind of adding in the guidance data, the guidebooks and the playbooks that they had for clearing these claims, as well as adding in whatever client documentation we had for that particular claim, for that particular office or and then we had thumbs up, thumbs down mechanisms as we were doing that kind of stuff. But that also had its own separate evaluation, right? Because there's evaluating how the model is predicting how accurate that is, which is generally pieces. But then there's accurating how good is the output from y'all. Did it actually tell me what I needed to do to adjudicate this claim, and did it do it faster? So continuing to gather that feedback, more feedback, that's going to allow us to continue to fine tune the model. Even if you're just using an off-the-shelf model, the evaluations are so critical because it's the only real way that you can open up the door to more advanced things like fine-tuning Gemini to get higher, more accurate results, like potentially building your own foundation model down the line where you want to run and host this stuff in Vertex because you can very easily access it, or mixing models together. There's so many options that become open to you with good evaluation data that we like. I will harp on it forever. To talk about the results, right? So they had a 20% reduction in multiple claim submissions, which they call them problem claims, which are the ones where it's like the denial code comes back, but it's something minor and then it uncovers a new one, right? So we were able to short circuit 20% of those and make those much faster. Their overall turnaround time was down 15% for the pilot groups that we were running this with. And the overall throughput for their adjudicators improved as a part of this, but they didn't quite have all of the metrics in place in their system to measure this. So everybody felt really good about it, but we weren't able to totally measure it by the end. So I just kind of want to call it out. Felt good, but I want to know but how many claims are they doing a day now? Did it go from 20 to 30? What was the improvement there? Because I'm a numbers guy. But I want to point out that this is for an RCM company, right? If you start to think about this holistically, they're one piece of the pie here. And what do we really want to do with these scenarios when we're talking about large providers or we're talking about hospital systems themselves? Well, we really need to shift it left Like, we really need to take this technology that we're training in stage 4 or in the denials and the actual claims adjudication process, and we need to figure out how do we get that information in a not onerous way back to the people who are actually filling out the charts and making the clinical decisions, right? So this is why thinking about the whole workflow is of critical importance across the board, right? Even the adjudicators, where they fix it is back in the medical record, right? They fix it there, and then they fix it in the PA system, and then they run it again, right? So that's really where we need to get all of this intelligence and this information. And so when I think about this, like overall, like if I were to go in and talk to, a big health system, I would say like, well, okay, let's go from here, but like, because that's where the data is right now. That's where we can train these models. But how do I get that? How do I get that in front of the provider? How do I get that in front of the nurse? How do I get it so that it's rather than them having to guess and check and figure things out on their own, it's just automatically kind of happening for them, and it feels like magic, right? Because that's really what we're going for with all of this stuff. That's kind of the end-to-end goal, and that's how we're approaching this. And so we're having these conversations now with another provider system to kind of talk about how do we take what we've learned.
Rob, something that you mentioned, which I think is really important, is that a lot of people think of generative AI as not being able to be deterministic, which is the case. But when you look at a workflow and you look at the problem that you're trying to solve, I think what is important is that you have more tools today than you've had in the past, and you have the ability to combine. Like, what if something has to be deterministic, and you have the information so that you can do that? There's no reason why you actually can't take deterministic AI with generative AI and have an agent acting on it. So don't think that it's one or the other. And also with regards to the level of accuracy, the big aha has not just been striving for this 100% accuracy, but also looking at what is the actual accuracy today with humans doing it. And so when you think about mentally, people are trying to get technology to be 100%. The reality is 90 and 95% in many cases is far superior than when you have humans who have the bias filters and the errors going into the process. The actual, percentage of accuracy in many cases is much lower than people even believe until they look at it. So it's an interesting kind of expectations, but also realizing the fact that you have many tools, and we still are going in with traditional AI and having things be deterministic, combining different tools together in order to get the desired output.
So Amy, like in your use case or your comment there about accuracy, right? We've been doing some work in the space, what I would refer to as a stare and compare, right? Where someone's job is to look at documents and compare them. In one case, we took a customer's accuracy from 80% to 97% by just leveraging what we would refer to as a document intelligence accelerator, right? So those are things that we can easily solve for and bring significant productivity gains, but also significant increase in accuracy. Other areas of interest, and it's kind of a mixed bag, is around nurse handoffs. We used AI to help a very large system with 100 plus facilities carve out 30 minutes at each nurse shift change and bring a shift change down to 10 minutes. Now we know that Epic has a template within their footprint that they're trying to leverage, but for those non-Epic environments, right, this has been a huge area of interest. One other area that we're starting to see significant uptake is with Google's Gemini Live and Voice LM capabilities. The ability to have automated call out for appointments cancellations. We've got one organization we're working with they estimate 26 million calls a year is what they're trying to make to fill cancellations for elective appointments and surgeries. So now we have the ability to have a near human-like experience, not a robotic call center chatbot experience. And that's starting to change the mindset of, okay, how do we bring more revenue in by having a better customer experience and omni-channel experience? So I guess what I'm trying to say is the mileage will vary. What your entry point is with AI will vary by organization, what your comfort levels are. You start easy and build from there, or you go after the complex one because you have a big problem you're trying to solve. We've been in the middle of all those.
All right, while we're going to the next slide, I'm going to address this question from Christopher Martinez. The question is, since regulations around AI and mental health are still being created and changing fast, this one talks about the Illinois law prohibiting therapy AI, how should we go about building systems in a certain environment. So the reality is, regardless of what industry that you're in, technology is moving so fast that the very first thing that I would think about is, how do you first adopt a platform that gives you the ability to be flexible? The reality is, when you think about first and third party, like, new models are being developed and capabilities are emerging with regards to being able to connect into so many different information sources. So first I would go to look for a secure platform that gives you the flexibility to swap capabilities in and out. They exist. Google's one of them, but mentally I would be thinking about, like, you cannot lock yourself into an environment that does not give you the ability to be flexible. Models are getting faster, models are getting better, models are getting smaller, models are getting cheaper. And so what's happening is, you want to be able to plug and play and have the flexibility to use whatever model you want to use when you want to use it. So I would think through, what is the right platform that gives me the security and the flexibility so I can, plug and play when needed, because, today we're in a phenomenal place. 3 to 6 months from now, I'll be saying the same thing, because it is just moving so fast. So it really is, future-proof yourself by thinking about being on a platform that gives you the flexibility that you need in order to swap things out, because we will see a tremendous amount of change over the next couple of years for sure. Do you want to move on to the next slide?
I was just going to move it on over to the Q&A and say.
Did we want to? Okay, I wasn't sure if we wanted to cover nurse handoff or not.
Rick kind of let into it too, and but
Okay.
Obviously we're.
Yeah, and so just before we do Q&A, I just want to give a framework of a handful of things that we're seeing. So when you think about just going through a workflow, we are seeing generative AI and agents being heavily engaged in the scheduling and the patient intake. Think about everything that has to do with care management, where people are drafting or creating plans. The goal is, can you use this technology to create the drafts, to take prescriptive actions, not taking away the human decision-making process, because we firmly believe that clinicians need to stay in between this information and the customer or the patient when it comes to diagnosis or care plans. But what type of work or what type of information can be brought forward, served, directed in order to make the best use of that clinician time? When you think about coding, billing, went through revenue cycle, contact centers, a lot of, I would say, agent type support and capabilities, contract management, patient and clinician concierge, they're popping up all over the place, and all types of what I consider to be help desk type activities. So where you have policies, procedures, you have a wealth of information. So this could be an IT help desk, this could be an HR help desk. A lot of those back office functions that are just supporting organizations are prime for this type of technology. And even when you look at contract management, being able to have an assistant that can help you think through, like, what is the highest quality, lowest cost type supply. I mean, you really can think of all back office functions as well as your core business function, and think through where could I actually use more insight and more quote unquote manpower to be helping me, non-biased manpower to be helping me, and then where can we actually free up time for people. So any time consuming activity that is administrative or low level, you should be thinking about how, is there a way that we actually can inject this technology? We have customers who have said to us, we want 50% of the work to be done before it hits a human's desk. And then we want to enable that human to do that process 50% faster. And so just thinking through the types of benchmarks that customers are thinking through as they're trying to create something more efficient and more effective. Now that's more of the traditional workflow. And then we have both well-established and I would say more kind of innovative companies that are a little bit smaller and more nimble, both thinking about how do we actually redesign how our company works in parallel so that we can create our future company while we are running. And the two of those often do blend. As you're making the existing process more efficient, you are kind of enabling what that future model is going to look like. So let's take a look at the Q&A. Rick, I don't know if you and Rob have looked at some of the questions. I'll review here as well.
Just
Hi, everyone.
Sorry.
All good. And the slides will go out. So if anyone wants to watch the nurse handoff, video, it's 90 seconds long. Just giving you an idea of our approach and how we solved it. But I'm in chat. I don't see any current questions, Amy.
Okay, and we're actually at the end. What I liked about nurse handoff, and I think this is, nurse handoff was a use case that started last year and was probably there's a huge urgency with regards to the shortage of nurses. And so looking at how can you actually alleviate some of the burden. That use case is highly repeatable when you think about not only nurse handoff from shift to shift, but creating discharge summaries and anywhere where someone actually has to sit there and go through notes and create a draft in any function, whether it's healthcare or life sciences, being able to leverage this technology. We have come so far with regards to, I would say, these LLMs being able to understand medical context. It is like night and day compared to what we had last year and what we have this year, and it continues to get much, much better. We do not want these things to go out without a clinical person reviewing. We feel really strongly about that, but the quality of a lot of the technology in this clinical environment has just become like superior compared to what it was in the past. So with that said, any closing comments, Rob and Rick? And like we mentioned, we will get this replay out to everybody shortly.
No, just want to say thank you, right? We, Amy, Allison, and team, just appreciate you guys giving us an opportunity to kind of share our perspective of what we're seeing in the marketplace. And I know mileage will vary and everyone's going to have an opinion. AWS, Microsoft, Google, right? We're placing a bet with Google. We believe that they have the best models. And again, I think, everyone's going to make advancements, but competition's good and healthy. But my thought process would be place a bet so that you can gain the operational efficiency and value from working with one organization at scale. These problems are hard to solve, right? In fact, Google just announced that they'll allow customers to run AI on-prem. So in some cases, we may want to put an AI appliance at the edge to ensure that the AI models can run at the edge. The market's moving very quickly, and Google's at the tip of the spear. So happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you, everyone. This has been a great summer session. We've had thousands of people register and hundreds of people attend each one. So I appreciate everyone and the great questions and the participation. So look forward to getting you guys out the recordings for the entire summer camp session. And hopefully we get to see you guys all again during another new session that we have.
Oh, he would just raise his hand.
Oh. Is there a question that? No.
Okay.
All right. I think we're good. All right. Take care,
Bye, folks.
everyone. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.